Commander Jake Morrison had seen many things during his 15 years serving aboard the human diplomatic vessel Harmony's Edge, but nothing quite prepared him for the sight before him. The massive throne room of the Zilanian Empire stretched out like a cathedral of polished obsidian, its walls adorned with the preserved heads of conquered species. At its center sat Empress Vexthera, a being whose very presence seemed to bend reality around her crystalline form. The creature cowering at Jake's feet whimpered softly. It looked like a cross between a wolf and a panther, standing nearly 4 feet tall with midnight black fur that seemed to absorb light. Its eyes glowed with an intelligence that spoke of more than mere animal instincts. Burns and cuts covered its body, evidence of recent torture. This pathetic creature, the Empress hissed, her voice like grinding glass, was meant to be my personal hunting companion, a gift from the Catharian Federation to commemorate our new alliance. Her 6 arms gestured dismissively at the wounded animal. Instead, it refuses to kill. It shows mercy to prey. It is defective. Jake knelt beside the creature, noting how it flinched but didn't snap at his outstretched hand. In his years of diplomatic service, he had learned to read body language across dozens of species. This wasn't defiance or stupidity in the creature's eyes. It was pain, confusion, and something remarkably close to hope. "Your Imperial Magnificence," Jake said carefully, using the formal address protocols demanded by Zilanian custom. Perhaps this creature simply requires different training methods. Humans have considerable experience with similar species. The Empress laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Humans? You barely evolved primates think you can succeed where the greatest beastmasters of 3 galaxies have failed?" She leaned forward on her throne, her multiple eyes focusing on Jake with predatory interest. "Very well, take it. Consider it a test of your species' supposed ingenuity. But know this. When you fail, as you surely will, I will feed both you and this worthless beast to my Krexhari." The mention of the Krexhari sent a chill through the assembled court. Jake had heard whispers of these creatures, bioengineered predators that the Empress used to dispose of those who displeased her. He'd seen the remains of their victims, and the sight still haunted his dreams. "We accept your challenge, Your Imperial Magnificence," Jake replied, bowing deeply. "What time frame do we have to prove our methods?" "1 solar cycle," the Empress declared. 57 of your days. Return here with this creature transformed into the perfect killing machine, or face the consequences of failure. As Jake carefully lifted the wounded animal, he felt its weight, surprisingly heavy for its size, suggesting dense muscle and bone structure. The creature looked up at him with those luminous eyes, and for a moment, Jake could have sworn he saw gratitude there. The journey back to the human quarters took 20 minutes through the labyrinthine corridors of the Zilanian palace ship. Jake's mind raced as he carried his unexpected charge. The Empress hadn't just given him a wounded animal. She'd handed him what amounted to a death sentence wrapped in a diplomatic challenge. In his private chambers, Jake laid the creature on his sleeping platform and began examining its injuries. The burns were definitely from energy weapons, while the cuts looked like they came from ceremonial blades. Someone had been trying to force this being into aggressive behavior through pain and fear. "Well, friend," Jake murmured as he reached for his medical kit. "Looks like we're both in quite a predicament." The creature's ears perked up at his voice, and it made a soft sound that was neither growl nor whine. Jake had served on enough frontier worlds to recognize intelligence when he saw it. This wasn't just an animal. It was a sentient being, possibly even sapient. As he cleaned and dressed the wounds, Jake began talking. He told the creature about Earth, about dogs and wolves and the long history humans shared with canine companions. He spoke of loyalty born not from fear but from mutual respect, of partnerships that had helped humanity reach for the stars. The creature listened intently, its head tilted in a way that reminded Jake powerfully of his childhood dog. Rex, when Jake finished treating the injuries, the being carefully licked his hand, a gesture of trust that hit him harder than any diplomatic breakthrough he'd ever achieved. "What's your name?" Jake asked softly, knowing he wouldn't get an answer but feeling the need to ask anyway. The creature made a series of soft sounds, almost musical in their complexity. Jake listened carefully, then tried to repeat them. After several attempts, he managed something close to the original sound. "Thisera," he said finally. "Is that right?" The creature's tail wagged once, just once, but it was enough to confirm Jake's guess. Over the next few days, Jake began to understand the magnitude of the challenge before him. Thyssera was indeed intelligent, possibly as much as any human child. She understood complex instructions and could solve simple puzzles. But every time Jake attempted anything resembling combat training, she would shut down completely, trembling and refusing to engage. The other human crew members began to take an interest in Thyssera. Dr. Sarah Chen, the ship's xenobiologist, was fascinated by her physiology. Chief Engineer Tom Rodriguez brought her small mechanical toys that she could dismantle and reassemble with remarkable skill. Communications Officer Lisa Park noticed that Thyssera seemed to respond to different tones and rhythms in human speech, but it was Jake who made the first real breakthrough. On the 7th day, while reviewing diplomatic files in his quarters, he absently reached for a stress ball, a small rubber sphere he squeezed when thinking. Thyssera perked up immediately, her eyes fixed on the ball with laser-like intensity. Jake tossed it gently across the room. Thyssera caught it mid-air with reflexes that would have impressed a combat pilot, but instead of bringing it back, she sat down and began examining it with her paws, turning it over and over with obvious fascination. "You like games," Jake realized aloud, "but not violent ones. You want to play, not fight." That night, as Thyssera curled up on the foot of his sleeping platform, Jake stared at the ceiling and wondered what kind of species could produce such a gentle creature, and what the Empress truly wanted from this challenge. Something told him there was far more to this situation than a simple test of training methods. The countdown had begun. 50 days to transform a peaceful, intelligent being into a killing machine or die trying. 2 weeks into their time together, Jake had learned more about Thyssera than he'd initially thought possible. She wasn't just intelligent, she was brilliant. Her understanding of spatial relationships rivaled that of trained engineers, and her memory was nearly perfect. She could recreate complex patterns after seeing them only once, and her problem-solving abilities consistently surprised the human crew, but the combat training remained a complete failure. Every morning, Jake would attempt different approaches. He started with simple defensive maneuvers, hoping to build up her confidence gradually. Thyssera would participate eagerly until the moment Jake introduced anything resembling aggression or violence. Then she would freeze, her entire body trembling, and retreat to the furthest corner of the room. Dr. Chen had run extensive medical scans with Thyssera's cooperation. "Her physiology is fascinating, Jake," she reported during one of their daily briefings. "She's definitely built for combat. Her bone density is incredible, her muscle fibers are unlike anything I've seen, and her nervous system shows adaptations for lightning-fast reflexes. But look at this." Chen pulled up a holographic display of Thyssera's brain scan. "See this area here? It's overdeveloped compared to what we'd expect from a predator species. This is where most mammals process empathy, social bonding, and emotional connection. In Thyssera's species, it's almost 3 times larger than it should be. So she's naturally more empathetic?" Jake asked. "More than that, she's probably capable of forming emotional bonds that would put most humans to shame. The Catharians didn't give the Empress a defective killing machine. They gave her a being that's literally evolved to form deep, meaningful relationships." That evening, as Jake sat in his quarters reviewing tactical manuals and growing increasingly frustrated, Thyssera approached with something in her mouth. She dropped it at his feet, a small, intricately carved figurine that Jake recognized as belonging to Communications Officer Park. "Did you take this from Lisa's room?" Jake asked, trying to sound stern. Thyssera made a series of soft sounds and gently pushed the figurine toward him with her nose. Then she trotted over to her sleeping area and returned with Jake's missing stylus, placing it beside the figurine. "You've been collecting things that belong to the crew?" Jake realized. "Things that smell like us?" Thyssera's tail wagged tentatively, and she made a sound that Jake had learned meant agreement. Jake picked up both items, studying them. The figurine was a small earth animal, a rabbit that Lisa's daughter had carved for her. The stylus was one Jake used daily for his diplomatic work. Both items would carry the scent and emotional significance of their owners. "You're trying to keep pieces of us close," Jake said softly. "You're building a pack." The word pack seemed to resonate with Thyssera. Her ears perked up, and she made excited sounds while her tail wagged more vigorously than Jake had ever seen. That night, Jake called an impromptu meeting with the crew. "I think I've been approaching this all wrong," he told them. We've been trying to turn her into a solitary killer, but her species might be naturally pack-oriented. She doesn't want to fight alone. She wants to fight as part of a group. Chief Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. So what are you suggesting? We train her to work with a team? More than that, Jake said, his excitement growing as the pieces fell into place. What if the Empress's challenge isn't really about training Thesara at all? What if it's about understanding her species? Think about it. The Catharians supposedly gave the Empress a hunting companion, but they gave her a being whose nature is completely opposed to solitary hunting. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. It could be a test of cultural understanding. If the Empress can't recognize Thesara's true nature, it might say something about the Zelanian Empire's approach to their new alliance with the Catharians. Over the following days, the crew began training with Thesara as a group. The change was immediate and remarkable. When working alongside humans, Thesara showed none of her previous reluctance. She would eagerly participate in defensive exercises, coordinate complex maneuvers, and even engage in controlled sparring, as long as it was clear she was protecting her pack rather than attacking an enemy. Her abilities, when properly channeled, were stunning. She could move through an obstacle course with fluid grace, anticipate the movements of multiple opponents, and coordinate her actions with human teammates with an almost telepathic precision. During one exercise, she successfully defended all 4 crew members from simulated attackers while never causing serious injury to the enemies, holographic constructs that she somehow understood weren't real threats. She's not a killing machine, Jake realized as he watched her work. She's a guardian. Her entire species might be evolved to protect rather than hunt. But this revelation brought new challenges. In 18 days, Jake would have to present Thesara to the Empress as a perfect killing machine. How could he showcase her true abilities without violating the specific terms of the challenge? The answer came from an unexpected source. Communications Officer Park had been working with Thesara on understanding human vocal patterns. During one session, Thesara began making sounds that Park initially thought were random vocalizations. But when she ran them through the universal translator, she discovered something extraordinary. "Jake, you need to hear this," Park called excitedly. "Thesara isn't just making sounds, she's speaking. Her language is incredibly complex, but the translator is finally starting to parse it." Jake rushed to the communications bay, where Thesara sat patiently beside the translation console. Park activated the recording system and nodded to Thesara, who began to speak. The translated words that appeared on the screen made Jake's blood run cold. "The Empress knows what I am. This is not a test of training. This is a test of honor. She wants to see if humans will sacrifice truth for survival." Jake stared at the screen, then at Thesara, whose intelligent eyes met his with unmistakable understanding. "You've been able to speak this whole time," he said quietly. Thesara made more sounds, and the translator converted them. "I speak, yes. But I watch first, I listen. I learn what kind of beings you are. Now I know. You are not like the Empress. You see value in life beyond its ability to take other lives." Jake knelt down beside her, his mind racing with implications. What does the Empress really want from this challenge? She wants to see if you will betray your nature to satisfy her demands, Thesara replied through the translator. Or if you will remain true to what makes you human, even when faced with death. The countdown continued. 15 days to find a way to satisfy the Empress's challenge without betraying either humanity's values or Thesara's nature. Jake was beginning to understand that this test would determine far more than just their survival. With only 10 days remaining before their appointment with the Empress, Jake found himself in deep conversation with Thesara every evening. Through the universal translator, he learned about her species, the Catharians, and the complex web of galactic politics that had led to this moment. "My people are not warriors in the way the galaxy believes," Thesara explained one night as the crew gathered around her. "We are protectors, guardians of our worlds and our allies. For millennia, we have served as peacekeepers throughout the Outer Rim territories." Dr. Chen leaned forward with interest. "But the Catharian Federation has a reputation as one of the most formidable military forces in this sector." "Because we are," Thesara replied, a note of pride in her translated voice. "But we fight only to protect. We are bonded to our charges, willing to die for them. This is why we are so effective. We fight not from anger or conquest, but from love. Jake felt a chill as the implications sank in. The Empress wanted a Catharian guardian as a hunting companion. She completely misunderstood what your species represents. More than that, Thaisara continued, she demanded that I be trained to kill without discrimination, without loyalty, without purpose beyond her entertainment. When I refused, she declared me defective. Chief Rodriguez whistled low. So this whole challenge isn't about training you to be a better killer. It's about whether we understand what you really are. Thaisara's tail wagged in agreement. The Catharian Federation has been watching this test. They chose me specifically because they knew I would not break under torture, would not betray my nature even facing death. They wanted to see how humans would respond when given the choice between easy survival and doing what is right. The weight of responsibility settled on Jake's shoulders like a lead blanket. This wasn't just about their own lives anymore. The outcome of this test could affect humanity's standing with both the Catharian Federation and the Zelanian Empire, potentially altering the balance of power across multiple star systems. What happens if we succeed in showing the Empress your true nature? Jake asked. Then the Catharian Federation will know that humans can be trusted as true allies, Thaisara replied. And the Zelanian Empire will learn that power built on fear and misunderstanding is ultimately fragile. And if we fail? Thaisara was quiet for a long moment. Then the galaxy will see that even humans, who pride themselves on adaptability and wisdom, will sacrifice their principles when faced with sufficient threat. It will change how every species views your people. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He stood at the viewport in his quarters, staring out at the swirling nebula that surrounded the Zelanian palace ship. Thaisara lay nearby, seemingly asleep, but Jake had learned to recognize when she was simply resting versus truly unconscious. You're not really sleeping either, he said softly. No, came the translated reply. I am thinking about my bondmate. Jake turned from the viewport. Bondmate? My life partner. She remains on Cathara Prime, waiting to learn if I will return. Thaisara lifted her head, her glowing eyes reflecting the nebula's light. Among my people, when one is chosen for a mission like this, their bondmate shares the fate. If I die here, she will choose to follow me into death. It is our way. The casual mention of this additional stake hit Jake like a physical blow. You never mentioned this before. You did not need to know. Your choice should be based on what is right, not on emotional manipulation. Jake stared at her, understanding for the first time just how much trust this being had placed in him and his crew. She had literally put her life and her mate's life in their hands, betting everything on the belief that humans would choose honor over survival. The next morning, Jake called another crew meeting. We're not going to try to make Thaisara into something she's not, he announced. Instead, we're going to show the Empress exactly what she really is and hope that's enough. They spent the remaining days refining their plan. Instead of combat training, they focused on demonstrating Thaisara's protective abilities. They created scenarios where she would need to defend innocent beings from genuine threats, situations where her natural instincts could shine. Dr. Chen worked with Thaisara to understand her species' unique abilities. Beyond her incredible physical capabilities, Thaisara possessed something the doctor called empathic resonance. She could sense the emotional states of those around her and respond accordingly. When protecting someone who was genuinely afraid, her abilities increased exponentially. It's like she becomes stronger when others depend on her, Chen explained. Her entire biology is oriented toward sacrifice for others. Chief Rodriguez designed a series of mechanical challenges that would showcase Thaisara's problem-solving abilities under pressure. She could dismantle complex security systems in minutes, but only when doing so would protect someone else. Communications Officer Park discovered that Thaisara could understand and speak 17 different languages fluently, including several that were considered extinct. She's not just a guardian, Park realized. She's a living repository of cultural knowledge. As the final day approached, Jake felt both terrified and oddly peaceful. They had chosen their path, and there was no turning back now. Are you ready for tomorrow? He asked Thaisara the night before their appointment. I have been ready since the moment I was captured, she replied. The question is whether the galaxy is ready for what we will show them. Jake looked around at his crew. Chen with her scientific curiosity, Rodriguez with his practical engineering mindset, Park with her gift for communication. They had all chosen to stand with Thysera, knowing the risks. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Jake said, "I want you to know that knowing you has made us better humans." Thysera's tail wagged slowly, "And knowing you has reminded me why my species chooses to protect others even at great cost. Some things are worth any sacrifice." As dawn approached over the palace ship, Jake realized that win or lose they had already achieved something remarkable. They had formed a bond that transcended species, a connection based on mutual respect and shared values. Tomorrow, they would learn whether the rest of the galaxy was ready for such connections. The throne room looked different when Jake and his team arrived for their appointment. The usual court of sycophants and advisors had been replaced by what appeared to be representatives from dozens of different species. Jake recognized the crystalline forms of Altarian diplomats, the floating biomechanical constructs of the hegemony, and what he was certain were Catharian officials in flowing robes that concealed their features. Empress-rejected sat upon her obsidian throne, her multiple eyes fixed on Thysera with predatory intensity. "So," she said, her voice echoing through the vast chamber, "the humans return with their pet. I trust 57 days was sufficient to transform this pathetic creature into a proper killing machine?" Jake stepped forward, Thysera moving gracefully beside him. The crew followed, each carrying pieces of the demonstration equipment they had prepared. "Your Imperial Magnificence," Jake began, "using the formal protocols, we have indeed spent these weeks learning about Thysera's true capabilities. However, what we discovered may surprise you." The Empress leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. "Surprise me? Do you mean to tell me you have failed in the simple task of training a beast to kill?" "Not failed, Your Imperial Magnificence. We have succeeded beyond what either of us initially imagined possible." Jake gestured to Chief Rodriguez, who activated a holographic projector, the center of the throne room filled with a three-dimensional maze constructed of hard light barriers. At various points within the maze, humanoid figures appeared, some clearly designated as innocents, others as threats. "This demonstration will show Thysera's abilities in their proper context," Jake announced. "Not as a mindless killer, but as what she truly is." Without waiting for permission, Jake entered the maze. Immediately, the threat figures began moving toward him with obvious hostile intent. At the same time, several of the innocent figures were placed in immediate danger by separate threat sources. Thysera hesitated for just a moment at the entrance to the maze, then exploded into motion. What happened next left the assembled witnesses in stunned silence. Thysera moved through the maze like liquid lightning, her every movement precise and purposeful. She reached the first group of innocents just as the threats closed in, interposing herself between them with such grace that it looked choreographed. Her defensive maneuvers were flawless. She neutralized the threat figures without causing excessive damage, using the minimum force necessary. But that was only the beginning. While protecting the first group, Thysera simultaneously tracked Jake's position and the locations of all other innocents in the maze. She began a complex pattern of movement that defied belief, creating a protection zone that expanded through the maze like a living shield. Every time a threat approached any innocent, Thysera was there intercepting with perfect timing. The watching crowd began to murmur as they realized what they were witnessing. This wasn't combat, it was protection elevated to an art form. "Impressive reflexes," the Empress called out, though Jake could hear uncertainty in her voice. "But can she kill when necessary?" Jake nodded to Dr. Chen, who modified the simulation. Now some of the threat figures were designated as irredeemably hostile, beings that could only be stopped by lethal force. Thysera's demeanor changed instantly. Her protective grace remained, but now it was coupled with devastating efficiency. When faced with threats that couldn't be neutralized non-lethally, she struck with precision that was both beautiful and terrifying. Each lethal strike was clean, quick, and purposeful, death delivered without cruelty or unnecessary violence. Throughout the demonstration, Thysera maintained perfect awareness of every innocent in the maze. Even while delivering lethal force to true threats, she never allowed collateral damage. Her spatial reasoning and combat prediction were beyond anything Jake had ever witnessed. The demonstration concluded with Thysera standing in the center of the maze, every innocent safe, every threat neutralized, and Jake unharmed beside her. The throne room was completely silent. Then Communications Officer Park activated the universal translator, and Thyssera spoke directly to the assembled crowd. I am Thyssera of the Catharian Federation, Third Circle Guardian of the Outer Rim Territories. I am not a pet or a beast to be trained for entertainment. I am a protector, sworn to defend those who cannot defend themselves. The Empress's multiple eyes widened in shock. It speaks? I have always spoken, Empress Vexthera. You simply never asked what I had to say. Jake stepped forward. Your Imperial Magnificence, Thyssera, represents something the galaxy desperately needs. A species evolved not for conquest or domination, but for protection. Her people, the Catharians, have served as guardians for millennia. When they offered you a companion, they weren't giving you a hunting animal. They were offering you the protection of one of their most elite guardians. Protection? The Empress laughed, but the sound was less confident than before. What need have I of protection? Every being has something worth protecting, Thyssera replied. Even those who rule through fear have something they would die to preserve. Jake watched the Empress's expression change as the implications sank in. Around the throne room, the various diplomatic observers were clearly reassessing everything they thought they knew about both Catharians and humans. One of the robed Catharian observers stepped forward and lowered their hood, revealing features similar to Thyssera's but marked with intricate ceremonial tattoos. I am High Guardian Veltara of the Catharian Federation, the figure announced. Thyssera is my daughter, and I have watched this entire proceeding with great interest. The revelation sent a shock through the assembled crowd. The Empress had been casually torturing and dismissing the daughter of a High Guardian, essentially the equivalent of abusing the child of a head of state. The Federation has indeed been testing the humans, Veltara continued. But we have also been testing you, Empress Vexthera. We needed to know whether the Zilanian Empire could recognize value beyond brute force, whether you could understand the difference between strength and power. Jake felt the weight of the moment settling around them. This had never been just about Thyssera's training. It had been a complex diplomatic test with implications far beyond their individual survival. And what is your assessment? The Empress asked, her voice dangerously quiet. The humans have proven themselves worthy allies, Veltara replied. They saw my daughter's true nature immediately and chose to nurture it rather than break it. They understood that true strength comes from protection, not domination. Jake glanced at Thyssera, who was watching the exchange with intense focus. Everything they had worked for, everything they had learned about each other, was culminating in this moment. The Empress sat back on her throne, clearly calculating the political implications of what had just occurred. The Catharian Federation's alliance was valuable, potentially more valuable than whatever entertainment she might have derived from a hunting companion, but Jake could see something else in the Empress's expression, something he hadn't expected, genuine curiosity about what she had just witnessed. The silence in the throne room stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Jake could hear his own heartbeat and the soft breathing of his crew members. Thyssera stood perfectly still beside him, but he could sense the tension in her posture. Finally, Empress Vexthera spoke. High Guardian Veltara, you say this has been a test of my empire as well as the humans. I am curious to hear your full assessment. Veltara moved closer to the throne with fluid grace. Your Imperial Magnificence, the Catharian Federation has been observing the Zilanian Empire for some time. Your military might is unquestioned, your territorial expansion impressive, your economic power substantial. But we have wondered whether your empire possesses something that we consider essential in any lasting alliance. Wisdom. Jake saw several of the Empress's advisors shift uncomfortably. This was clearly not the direction they had expected this encounter to take. You speak of wisdom as though it were more valuable than strength, the Empress replied, her voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity rather than offense. Is it not? Thyssera interjected, stepping forward slightly. Your Imperial Magnificence, in your centuries of rule, what has brought you the most satisfaction? The fear of your enemies or the security of your people? Jake held his breath. Thyssera was taking an enormous risk by addressing the Empress so directly, but she seemed to understand something about the situation that escaped him. The Empress studied Thyssera for a long moment. You believe you understand something about me, young guardian. I understand that beings who rule through fear are often the most afraid, Thyssera replied. They build walls of power and violence because they believe it will protect what they value most. But true protection comes from being surrounded by those who would choose to defend you, not those who are forced to serve you. An interesting philosophy, the Empress mused. Tell me, if I were to accept your protection, what would that look like? What would you protect me from? Jake realized with growing amazement that the Empress was seriously considering Thaisara's offer. This had gone far beyond their wildest hopes for the demonstration. I would protect you from the loneliness that comes with ruling through fear, Thaisara answered without hesitation. I would protect you from the inevitable rebellion that fear always breeds. I would protect you from the mistakes that come from hearing only agreement instead of truth. And I would protect you from the enemies who would exploit the weaknesses that isolation creates. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her scientific mind clearly engaged. Your Imperial Magnificence, if I may add something from my observations of Thaisara's species, Catharian guardians don't just provide physical protection. They form genuine bonds with their charges. They offer loyalty born from choice, not compulsion. And what would such loyalty require from me? The Empress asked. Trust, Thaisara said simply. The willingness to be vulnerable enough to accept protection. The wisdom to listen to counsel even when it contradicts your desires. The strength to rule through inspiration rather than intimidation. Jake watched the interplay between the two beings with fascination. Somehow Thaisara was offering the Empress something that all her power and wealth couldn't buy, a genuine relationship based on mutual respect. Chief Rodriguez, apparently unable to contain himself any longer, spoke up. Your Imperial Magnificence, in my years as an engineer, I've learned that the strongest structures are those built on solid foundations of mutual support. What Thaisara is offering isn't weakness. It's the strongest kind of strength there is. The Empress turned her attention to the assembled diplomatic observers. And what do the rest of you think of this unusual turn of events? The Altarian representative resonated in harmonic tones that the universal translator converted to words. The crystalline communes have long believed that true power flows from harmony rather than dominance. If the Catharian Federation and humanity have found a path toward such harmony, it would be of great interest to us. Other representatives began speaking up, each offering perspectives that Jake hadn't expected. It seemed that the galaxy was full of species who had grown tired of the traditional power dynamics that the Zilanian Empire represented. High Guardian Veltara watched the proceedings with obvious satisfaction. The Federation has been seeking allies who understand that protection is stronger than conquest, that cooperation yields better results than domination. Today, we have seen humans choose the difficult path of understanding over the easy path of compliance. Jake felt a swell of pride in his species, but also a deep appreciation for what Thaisara had taught them about themselves. The Empress sat quietly for several minutes, clearly weighing options and implications. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a thoughtfulness that Jake hadn't heard before. Guardian Thaisara, she said formally, your words suggest that you see something in me worth protecting. This is unexpected. In my long rule, few have offered anything without demanding something greater in return. I offer my protection freely, Thaisara replied, not because of what you are, but because of what you could become. And you believe I could become something better than what I am? I believe every being has the potential for growth, for choosing a better path. Even those who have ruled through fear can learn to rule through inspiration. Jake saw something shift in the Empress's expression, a crack in the armor of absolute authority she had worn for so long. High Guardian Veltara, the Empress said, turning to Thaisara's parent, if I were to accept your daughter's protection, what would the Federation require in return? Only that you be worthy of it, Veltara replied. Catharian guardians cannot be bought, sold, or commanded. They choose their charges based on the potential for mutual growth and the opportunity to protect something truly valuable. The Empress looked at Jake and his crew. And you humans, what do you gain from this arrangement? Jake thought carefully before answering. Your Imperial Magnificence, we gain the knowledge that we chose correctly when faced with a difficult choice. We gain allies who share our values, and we gain the satisfaction of knowing that we helped create something better than what existed before. You ask for nothing material? We ask for the opportunity to continue growing and learning alongside our friends, Jake replied, gesturing toward Thaisara. The Empress stood from her throne, and the entire assembly held its breath. "Guardian Thisara," she said formally, "I accept your offer of protection. But know this, I will not be an easy charge. I have spent centuries building walls, and I may not know how to tear them down." Thisara's tail wagged for the first time since they had entered the throne room. "The strongest walls can become the foundation for the greatest gardens, your imperial magnificence. We will learn together." 6 months after the demonstration in the throne room, Jake found himself standing in what had once been the Empress's chamber of torture devices, now transformed into something he could never have imagined. The obsidian walls remained, but they were now covered with living gardens, plants from dozens of worlds that Thisara had carefully selected and nurtured. The air hummed with the soft sounds of flowing water and the gentle rustle of leaves. Empress Vexithera sat not on a throne, but on a simple bench beside a reflecting pool, her multiple arms moving in complex patterns as she worked on what appeared to be a holographic sculpture. The piece was beautiful, a crystalline representation of interconnected rings that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "It's a meditation aid," she explained as Jake approached. "Thisara taught me that creation can be as powerful as destruction, though considerably more challenging." Jake marveled at the change in the Empress's voice. The harsh grinding quality was gone, replaced by something warmer, more thoughtful. "It's beautiful, your imperial magnificence. Please, Jake, we've discussed this. When we're in private, call me Vex. I've discovered that constant formality can be as much a barrier as a protection." The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. For the first month, the Empress had struggled with the concept of accepting genuine counsel. She was used to advisors who told her what she wanted to hear, not a guardian who challenged her to examine her motivations and decisions. Thisara had been patient but firm. When the Empress ordered executions for minor infractions, Thisara would quietly suggest alternatives. When courtiers brought tales of rebellion in the outer territories, Thisara encouraged the Empress to investigate the underlying causes rather than simply crush the symptoms. "She saved my life. You know," Vex said quietly, continuing to work on her sculpture. "Not in the way you might expect." Jake settled onto a nearby bench, noting how different this conversation felt from their first meeting. "What do you mean?" 3 months ago, my food taster missed a poison that should have killed me within hours. Thisara detected it before I had taken more than a few bites. "Something about the scent," she said. "But that's not how she saved my life." Vex paused in her work, her multiple eyes focusing on the flowing water. "As my physicians worked to counteract the poison, Thisara sat with me through the night. She didn't offer platitudes or false reassurances. Instead, she asked me a question that changed everything." "What did she ask?" "She asked me what I would regret if I died that night. Not what I would miss or what I hadn't accomplished, but what I would regret." Jake waited, understanding that this was important. "I realized," Vex continued, "that I would regret all the fear I had caused, all the relationships I had poisoned with suspicion and intimidation, all the beauty I had destroyed in pursuit of security that was ultimately illusory." The sculpture in her hands pulsed brighter for a moment, responding to her emotional state. "That's when the real change began," she said. "Thisara didn't try to tell me what to do differently. She simply asked questions that helped me see clearly." Through the chamber's large windows, Jake could see the changes that had spread throughout the palace ship. Recreational areas had replaced interrogation chambers. The trophy rooms full of preserved heads had been converted into galleries showcasing art from throughout the empire. Most remarkably, the infamous Krexhari had been relocated to a nature preserve on a distant world, where they could live according to their nature without being used as instruments of terror. "The diplomatic implications have been fascinating," Vex noted, apparently following Jake's gaze. "When the hegemony's ambassador arrived last month, he was so shocked by the changes that he initially thought he had come to the wrong ship. How have your subjects responded?" Vex's expression grew thoughtful. "Better than I expected, though not without challenges. It turns out that many of my advisors were giving me the counsel they thought I wanted to hear, rather than what they actually believed. When I began asking for honest opinions, I discovered that several of my policies were causing more problems than they solved." A soft chime indicated someone requesting entry. Thisara padded into the chamber, moving with her characteristic fluid grace. In the months since becoming the Empress's guardian, she had grown even more magnificent. Her midnight fur now gleamed with health, and her bearing radiated quiet confidence. "Vex," she said, the universal translator converting her words. "The Altarian delegation has arrived for tomorrow's cultural exchange. They've brought samples of their latest harmonic compositions." "Excellent," Vex replied, setting aside her sculpture. "I'm particularly interested in their work on emotional resonance and crystalline structures." Jake marveled at the casual interaction. 6 months ago, the idea of the Empress discussing art appreciation would have been absurd. "How is your bondmate?" Jake asked Thaisara. Thaisara's tail wagged happily. "Kessara arrived yesterday. She's currently in the lower gardens working with the botanical team to establish a proper ecosystem for the Catharian plants we're introducing." "I'm looking forward to meeting her," Vex said. "Thaisara has told me so much about her work in ecological restoration." Jake shook his head in amazement. The Empress was genuinely excited about meeting her guardian's mate and discussing gardening techniques. "There's something else," Thaisara continued, her tone becoming more serious. "The Federation Council has made a decision about the proposal you submitted last month." Vex straightened, clearly anxious about the response. "They've approved it," Thaisara said, and Jake could hear the pride in her translated voice. "The Zilanian Empire will be granted full partnership status in the Galactic Protection Accord. You'll be the first empire to join based on demonstrated commitment to peaceful transformation." Vex stood abruptly, her multiple arms spreading wide in what Jake had learned was an expression of joy among her species. "They approved it? All of it? All of it. The refugee assistance programs, the cultural exchange initiatives, the joint exploration projects, everything." Jake felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The Galactic Protection Accord was something that had grown out of the events in the throne room. As more species witnessed the transformation of the Zilanian Empire, they had begun discussions about forming an alliance based on protection and cooperation, rather than traditional military or economic power. "What about the humans?" Vex asked. "Will they be founding members as well?" Thaisara's eyes seemed to glow brighter. The Federation Council was unanimous. Humanity will be recognized as one of the founding species of the Accord. With full representation in the Governing Council, Jake felt a surge of pride in his species, but also deep gratitude for the friendship that had made it possible. "There's one more thing," Thaisara added, looking directly at Jake. "The Council has requested that you serve as the first human ambassador to the Accord headquarters." "Me?" Jake was genuinely shocked. "You helped create this," Vex said warmly. "You showed the galaxy that transformation is possible, that former enemies can become true allies. Who better to help shape what comes next?" As Jake looked around the transformed chamber, at the Empress who had learned to rule through inspiration, at the Guardian who had taught them all about the power of protection, at the evidence of change that seemed almost magical in its scope, he realized that something genuinely surreal had indeed happened. They had taken a situation designed to force them into moral compromise and transformed it into the foundation for a new kind of galactic civilization. The feared predator had become the beloved guardian. The tyrant had become a leader worth following, and humanity had found its place among the stars not through conquest, but through understanding. It was, Jake reflected, exactly the kind of impossible thing that made the universe worth exploring.